What's going on, everybody? My name is Hangos. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at the Ricoh Digital GR3. I've reviewed Ricoh film cameras in the past, and as we all know, going from film to digital is a completely different ballgame. Has Ricoh succeeded? Well, that's up to you to decide at the end of this video. On the right, we have our external buttons, our mode dial, our scroll wheel to change aperture and shutter speed, and our power button. The more that I use older cameras, the more that I miss buttons with a single purpose. On the mode wheel, you'll probably find a locking mechanism, which you probably only see in higher end cameras. This was an interesting decision by Ricoh to bring it down to this consumer level camera. To be quite honest with you, I found it relatively annoying as I was trying to switch modes whenever I was shooting a photo. If it were up to me, I would personally get rid of the locking mechanism for faster mode switching. On the mode dial, you also get some customization, being able to route these buttons to your favorite filters or presets. I personally used one of the buttons to access the black and white filter much faster. The power button turns green when the camera turns on. On the right side of the camera, you have your micro USB and AV out outputs. I don't think I would suggest charging the camera via the USB port, as I don't think this was its original functionality, and you might mess up something internally. On the left, you'll find that there is a lever to release the flash. You can customize how you want your flash to react based on its environments in the settings. On the bottom, you'll find the tripod mount and the battery housing. The tripod mount is set dead center to the camera. Where the battery is located, you'll find a barn door. What I found annoying was that there's also a locking mechanism to the barn door. It doesn't automatically lock once you're finished loading the battery. If you're wondering what kind of batteries the camera takes, they are DB65, which are still very easily found on Amazon. Link down below. While it might be a bit hectic and cumbersome to release all these levers in order to switch between batteries, I found that because of their form factor and how small they are, they're relatively non-intrusive, and you can easily carry 2 of these batteries, which will last you the entire day. The storage that the camera takes, it takes your standard SD cards, which can be found at a relatively cheap price these days. If you're wondering what kind of glass this camera is rocking, according to Lightroom, it's running a f1.9 and 6mm lens. However, before we dive into the photos and results, let's look at this outer ring. The outer ring is removable, and you can add a wide variety of accessories to it. The most common one that I see is the macro attachment. However, I do find that these accessories are relatively hard to find and very expensive. In addition to that, I think that the purpose of a camera like this is for it to be stealthy and small, and adding these accessories just feels like an unnecessary amount of bulk. 6mm feels like the correct length for this lens, a nice point and shoot that really allows you to grab the scene wherever you're at. All around, what I noticed from the camera is the amazing build quality, the lack of wear and tear, the clickiness to the buttons, as they still feel very brand new. Some buttons are already routed to certain functionalities. I actually found myself using the flash button quite often. However, the way that it's displayed in the menu, some users might find it a bit intrusive and annoying over the fact that these functions take up the entire screen, which could prevent you from taking an adequate shot right in the moment. The Mark III has no viewfinder, but it has a big LCD screen. You can be risky and not use the LCD to view your shot in order to save some battery. But the battery on this little guy is absolutely astonishing. I found myself using the camera all day without really having to replace it at any moment. However, I would still carry a few batteries just in case. Moving back to the LCD screen though, don't trust the LCD screen. Looking at my first batch of images, thinking that they were heavily pixelated, out of focus, there was something wrong with my lens or screen. As I moved it into my computer, I noticed that the photos that I had taken looked in focus, they were fine, there was no pixelation. If you're to own this camera, I'd highly suggest not trusting the LCD screen. Focus more on your composition, exposure, and nailing that focus. When I finally looked through the images on a big screen, I could see that beautiful Ricoh look, really pushing the grain, having this beautiful soft texture to all the images. Sometimes the grain can be pushed just a little bit too much, but that's the film look we're all trying to achieve in post, right? Moving on to some of the more digital aspects of the camera, the menu system and customization. You can really customize the heck out of this Ricoh, which is astounding for a camera this small. I won't really dive too much into that customization aspect, as this is a review, and it's possible to just make an entire video about the customization. One small feature that I really enjoy that I wish more camera manufacturers would copy is the level. Now, other cameras do have levelers built into them, but I find that most of the time they're relatively big and intrusive. The Ricoh does a fantastic job putting it at the bottom, glowing green when the camera is finally centered. I found this to be an ingenious design choice, which is probably why I kept it on the entire time to make sure that my photos were properly leveled. Furthermore, the camera menu is hard to navigate and can be a little bit confusing. So let me show you an example. If you want to change just one setting, you go into the setting, change it, hit OK, and it'll take you back to the LCD. But what if you want to change multiple settings at a time? You don't hit the OK button. You go into the setting with the right arrow. Once you see what you want to change, you hit the left arrow and it'll set it to that preference. This can be confusing at first and it takes some adjustment. Even though I've had the camera for a few weeks now, I still find myself constantly hitting the OK button, just being annoyed at the UX choices. The reading and writing speeds from the Mark III are really slow, waiting for maybe 10 seconds to get a DNG file to come out. But I did use a few tricks in order to speed this up, like leaving the camera in aperture priority mode just so I had to think a little bit less, leaving on the snap focus, which lets you have a predetermined focus range. While adjusting these settings might have given me about a second or two extra, the camera still does hunt for focus pretty frequently, and I'm actually quite amazed at how some street photographers are able to capture such fast-moving action, like they time traveled a few seconds in order to get the perfect image. The Mark III features macro mode, and I actually did use it quite often with some of these shots. I just thought it was so neat how I was able to zoom in and enhance into everyday objects, which makes me want to get a macro lens further down the line. Finally, moving on to the image results, right? And I gotta say, these images aren't even up to just the standard smartphone quality, but there is a certain pizzazz to the images that come out of the Ricoh. I love the highlights, the warm tones, the way the grain is handled, how it's close to that film look we all desire. In addition, the black and white feels just so much more timeless, and I think it's a much better choice to shoot black and white with this camera. Regarding editing and post-processing, I actually didn't want to edit too many of the photos just because I wanted the organic, non-GMO, gluten-free, vegan-free, range-free, human-free file that the camera provided me. The highlights and shadow recovery were good, not great, but don't expect 5 stops of dynamic range from this camera. An editing component that you might find intriguing is that Lightroom provides no lens camera profile correction for the Ricoh lens. So you're just gonna have to stick to the regular vignetting or try to eyeball it as best as you can. But if you're trying to aim for that film look, then why try to correct the lens vignetting, right? Here are some of the images that I was able to capture. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Wrapping everything up, this camera feels more relevant now than it did in the past. Today, we want our gadgets to be functional, but also unique. And this camera kind of bridges the gap with its level of customization and beautiful images that it spits out. Ricoh feels a little bit ahead of its time, designing a camera for the future generations as it was handmade by the previous one. This is an excellent camera to pick up if you're heavily dedicated in the street photography game. Just make sure not to trust that LCD. And that concludes the review. Those are some of my thoughts and opinions along with the functionality of the camera. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and the Foundation app. Upvote me on there. It would mean a lot as I'm trying to sell some NFTs. Let me know what your thoughts are on this Ricoh camera. It feels very vintage, very for the time, just overall unique. At the end of the day, I thank you so much for your time and your attention. My name is Img Talk, and I'll catch you in the next one.